freaking first cut. Golly. Would you like us to give you $1 million? Well, we can't do that, but maybe we can give you some picks that'll get you most of the way there. DFS preview for this week's U.S. Open is coming in hot. Make sure to hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed. We'll jump into it right now. Welcome to the First Cut Podcast. I'm Rick Gehman. It is U.S. Open week. We are breaking down the DFS board, and joining me to do just that, Sia Nejad. Sia, very happy welcome.
Thank you very much. You know, I was telling you, you might be able to tell in my voice that I wasn't feeling too well this weekend coming in, but you know what made me feel better, Rick?
Tell me.
Doing research on the U.S. Open, getting on RickRunGood.com and checking out. And actually, I was doing some fantasy football research too, a little cross promotion. I do the FFT DFS show as well, and we got a good guest coming on tomorrow. But the point is, it's that CBS Sports, it's the RickRunGood.com, it's the sports research that actually beat Western medicine in terms of making me feel better. True story.
Fantasy football. I've heard of that. People enjoy that, don't they?
Yeah, it's kind of a thing. You know, it's not like as big as golf, right, but you know, it's getting there. It's the little engine that could.
All right. Well, I'm rooting for fantasy football. Maybe in a couple of years they'll be able to compete with fantasy golf. But see, we've got a big one this week. Last week felt big, but this is actually a major championship. We're going to Brookline, Massachusetts, and we're going to the Country Club. Let's just start with the field because it's a major championship field, and we are not getting the guys. We are getting the guys from the Live Golf Tour playing. They've not been banned in any way. They've not been uninvited in any way. So this is, even though we're kind of seeing a different tour break off here, a major championship brings them all back together.
Yeah, you wonder now that you contextualize it like that, if this is sort of the beginning of the end, if you will, of, you know, I'm not saying of any tour. I'm just saying of everybody sort of competing in the same space, because who knows, a year from now, when we're talking about the U.S. Open, maybe there's a group of these guys that just simply aren't allowed to play, or maybe they're still, you know, engrossed in a legal battle, which I assume is coming from both directions. So yeah, it's really interesting. I think we need to maybe kind of take a look at this and maybe this is maybe a one-of-a-kind thing, at least as it relates to the future.
Interesting. I hadn't really considered that. Yeah, this could be one of the few times left. I don't know. We have no idea what's going to happen, but we know for this week that everybody will be here. Producer Troy, if you could share my screen, that'd be excellent. I will show you visuals and data from my website, RickRunGood.com. And Sia, I did something different this week. So this looks the same. Course key stats model, where normally I would go back and I would look at all the past history for a specific golf course for every player, find the types of golfers that have success. But we haven't played at the Country Club really. I mean, we had the Ryder Cup here in 1999. It just hasn't been played. There's not enough data to actually do this. So what I did for the first time ever was I used a lot of key indicators for other USGA setups. I used a lot of key indicators for what we think is going to happen and the way that the Country Club is going to play. And I was able to calculate what I believe to be the most correlated stats. I couldn't go all week without having something.
No, I hear you on that. You of all people, you got to have something. And you know, looking at this chart, or looking kind of at both sets of charts that we see here, I would agree with most of it. I mean, I definitely think around the green and off the tee is going to shape how a lot of these players finish. If you're good in those areas, you're probably going to be pretty good in this tournament. So obviously approach is going to come into play. That's huge. It always is. But I think off the tee, I mean, Rick, I think you'd probably agree that this one, when it comes to off the tee, that maybe accuracy is a little bit more important, because the rough is probably going to be a little bit more penal than most places. And that's just like standard US Open stuff too, right?
Yeah, we have to kind of look at this through two different lenses. There's the lens of what is the Country Club. That's one side of it. Then also through the lens of what the USGA is going to do to it. And the latter, the USGA has been fairly consistent over the years that they are going to be narrow fairways and thick rough. I imagine we are going to get exactly that, where if you are not playing out of the short grass, maybe it's a half a stroke penalty or a quarter stroke penalty, just because it is that difficult to extract your ball from the rough. And there's kind of different levels of rough. There's fescue in some spots. It's not like winged foot where everything is the same length. Now that's the USGA side of it. The Country Club side of it, Sia, is these really small greens, second smallest greens in major championship history. And the I'm going to use the word rough, but like, I don't mean it in terms of fairway or tee boxes or rough. I mean it like it's not smooth around these greens. And there's just, some grass is higher than others. And sometimes it's a little bit wispy and sometimes it's going to get hung up as it rolls into the bunker. And sometimes it's going to go down into the like, it's just going to be a little bit random. And that's kind of the nature of a New England golf course that is, over 100 years old. Like, that's what you would expect. So the paths, I think, are, be an elite ball striker or have an elite short game.
Yeah, and I think the emphasis should probably be on that elite short game because, you just kind of laid it out why this course is going to be very tough, why you really have to like plan your shots and navigate each hole, but add in the elements. Like you're likely going to get some, some rain or some wind that's going to be included here. Even if you don't, it's going to be a hard course. But my point is there is a lot to sort of, I don't think people are going to be, the greens in regulation percentage is going to be really low regardless. So I think you really need to be emphasizing around the green game. And I think that makes people uncomfortable, especially when they're doing their modeling. They don't want to put, a super big emphasis on that. But I can tell you that if, with my models, and I don't only look at models, but if you are a certain ranking outside like of, what I see fit, like let's say outside the top 70 in around the green play, and I'll factor in sand saves as well, I may just exit out of my pool here. I really think it's that important. So that's definitely like the primary focus for me because I think it's going to be hard to hit the fairways. I think it's going to be hard to hit the greens in regulation. And so I know around the green game is really going to come into play.
To circle back to your original point here, there is, again, through the USGA lens, this golf course is 7,254 yards long. That'll obviously fluctuate day in and day out, but that's 500 yards shorter than Torrey Pines. That's like 700 yards shorter than Erin Hills. This is not going to be one of those super bomber US Opens. I still think it's going to play like a US Open. I just think that maybe 10 or 12 more guys are capable of winning this Sia as opposed to like the 22 that could have possibly won this at Erin Hills.
I totally agree. I mean, there's definitely going to be an advantage to some bombers who navigate the course differently because of their length. Obviously, you're bringing a lot of danger into play when you're doing that. But like the Scotty Schefflers of the world and the John Rahms, like they're going to be able to do things that some of those other guys that we're kind of referencing can't do. But at the end of the day, you're right. This it is different from a length standpoint. It does bring a few more people into play that you would otherwise be like, well, they might be good for a top 40, but they're not top 10 material. They're not top 15 material.
Okay, well, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the cheat sheet. We'll go through who those top 10 materials might be. But first, we're going to take a quick break and hear a word from our partners.
Martin, the reunion. Action.
This one's for you, Tommy.
A reunion to remember.
This show was and still is big for the culture.
Martin the Reunion, streaming June 16th on BET+.
And we're back. Here's the cheat sheet at RickRunGood.com. And Sia, we will start where we always do, that $10,000 range. Scotty Scheffler, the most expensive player on the slate, 11-3. Justin Thomas, 10-9. Jon Rahm, 10-8. Rory McIlroy, fresh off his victory in Canada, is 10-5. And we round it out with Cam Smith and Collin Morikawa. How would you like to start spending your dollars up top?
Let me start by just Xing somebody out here. I just don't think I can bring myself to play Collin Morikawa. And I understand the game theory route there, and I haven't looked at his ownership. I'm assuming he's going to be like, obviously lower than most of those guys in the 10K and above range. But, what I saw at the Memorial, it just, I know his approach numbers look decent there at the Memorial, but man, what I saw on Friday with the approach game in particular, I was kind of perplexed. I understand he was bad around the green and that's what really cost him, but there were other parts of his game that I feel like the stats aren't telling the full story necessarily. I just don't have any confidence that all of a sudden you're going to have a bounce back at the US Open of all places. So he's a guy that I think I can just sort of X out right off the bat.
Finished fifth at the Masters, hasn't done much since. He doesn't have a top 25 in his 5 starts since. He continues to struggle with the putter, the short game, which I usually think that Collin Morikawa is, especially out of the bunkers, quite a creative, very good short game player. The metrics aren't necessarily aligning with that at the moment, Sia, which does certainly offer some concern.
Yeah, so if you're taking Colin out of the mix, it doesn't really help, right? Because you still got 4 guys to choose from, and I will say this: pricing is obviously, because it's a major, pricing is really fair. I think people will definitely come up here. I think Rory's going to be pretty popular. I think Scotty's probably going to be pretty popular. Maybe JT. I think Rahm will fall under those 3 just a little bit, which is part of the reason I actually like John Rahm quite a bit. But before I get there, let me just point out that a lot of people will start with more balanced builds because they don't want to go to the 6K range. They want to kind of like deal with that 8K range, which is super rich, in the 9K range. We'll get there, but these guys up top might be a little bit more under-owned than people think. John Rahm is so interesting to me because, okay, so we were really concerned about the around the green game over the last like 3 or 4 months. Well, that's clearly like bounced back to a pretty large degree. Looking at it now on YouTube, I mean, he's gained, what is that? 3 out of 5, and 2 of those are in a pretty significant way. So I'm not as concerned there. It is a little concerning that, he's lost some strokes off the tee on approach, but he's John Rahm. And if he's going to be like 5% lower than, let's say, your Justin Thomases of the world or even your Rory McIlroys, I think it's time. I think it's time to, quote, be a touch early on John Rahm. So he's probably my favorite in this range.
Yeah, I think the 2 guys that I think fly under the radar are Rahm and Cam Smith here. So John Rahm, you nailed it, Sia. When he switched to the Callaway sticks, he struggled with the short game stuff out of the gate. And it honestly stopped him from winning some golf tournaments. Well, he's fixed that. And he loses 2 strokes off the tee at the Memorial, which, by the way, snapped like a 40-event streak in which he gained strokes off the tee. Very unlikely for that to happen again. And he still finished T10 despite losing 2 strokes off the tee. So very little concerns around John Rahm. Cam Smith is another interesting one, Sia, because if you remember, this finish from last week, T48, that was all on Thursday. He was 6 over on Thursday, did not make a single birdie. Over the final 3 rounds of that event, he had the 8th best score if you just play the final 3 days. And when you start to look at the other metrics and the short game and how well-rounded he is, I do worry that he can spray it off the tee. But I think those 2, as we get later in the week and start to see what the ownership is going to look like, I think they might be some interesting pivots.
Yeah, Cam Smith is interesting. I do think as much as he sprays it, you will have some holes, I think, where guys like Cam Smith or guys like everyone really will be clubbing down and just play certain holes more positionally. With that said, I'm still like pretty worried about him spraying it. I think there's other guys to go to here, but I will say this. I just got done giving like a dissertation on how much I like around the green game. So it's kind of silly for me to all of a sudden be like, oh, I don't like Cam Smith. But I'll say this. There's a lot of guys that we'll go through that I really like their short game, including Cam Smith, but are better in terms of hitting fairways, a little bit more consistent off the tee. So I think Cam Smith is probably out for me unless his ownership percentage is so low that I just feel compelled to play him.
So we assume Rory McIlroy, $10,500 with the pricing coming out before his win at the RBC Canadian, going to be very, very popular. Justin Thomas as well, Sia, $10,009, and then Scotty Scheffler gets slotted somewhere in there.
Yeah, so I think it's going to play out like this, and this is partly because of the pricing that we see. I mean, obviously, Rory McIlroy and Justin Thomas are a slight deal off of Scotty Scheffler, but I think Rory's going to be the most popular in this range. I think JT is going to be second, and I think Scotty and Rom, well, I think Scotty's going to be third and Rom's going to be fourth. And then you're going to have Cam Smith and Colin under that. So I think Scotty is probably my next favorite guy. He's 11,300. People generally aren't going to want to play that, especially recency bias. You got Rory, how he did, and Scotty, how he did last week. And, Scotty hasn't been as on fire as he was, 3 months ago. And there's obviously some prisoner of the moment stuff going on there. So I think Scotty at 11,300. I guess my favorite 2 here are Scotty and John Rahm.
Yeah, I think the order that you laid out in terms of projected ownership makes a ton of sense, and I imagine that's kind of what we're vibing towards, at least here early in the week. Sometimes with major championships and the pricing coming out so early, ownership starts to become very aware of itself as we get closer and closer. But I like the way that you have framed it early in the week. The $9,000 range: Victor Hovland, Xander Schauffele, Jordan Spieth, Dustin Johnson, Will Zalatoris, and then we rounded out with Patrick Cantlay, Hideki Matsuyama, and Shane Lowry. This along with the 8K range is filled with great golfers, Sia. So we're gonna have to make some hard decisions here.
Yeah, this is a good range with some interesting pivots. So I think Xander's going to be the most popular in this range, and he kind of has earned that. I know this is a different course, but his US Open history is actually kind of amazing. In spite of the fact that there's no win in there, it's like pretty amazing.
Yeah, so here's his US Open stuff. T5, T6, T3, 5th, T7. That's 5 straight, top 7 finish.
And here's the thing. I'm sure some of those he was like a sleeping giant and maybe kind of came back and improved from 15th to like 6th or something. But the reality is with those finishing positions, he was, I'm guessing in 3 out of those 5, he was in position to win. And it probably came down to just a 3-hole stretch where it just didn't work out for him or something. I can't remember every single one. But the point is when I see that type of finishing position, like you may as well put a couple ones in there because like the margins between finishing 3rd and 1st are just so small that I'm just going to give him credit for just being really elite on these US Open setups, if you will. So he's going to be the most popular. I don't mind him. I probably prefer him in a cash game setup. As far as guys I want to play in tournaments, I think Jordan Spieth is really interesting at 9,500. I don't think he's going to be super high owned. I don't think he's going to be super low owned. I think the whole concept of, we still kind of think Jordan's not super accurate off the tee, and he's not super accurate off the tee, but he's more accurate than he was. I do think he's such a good navigator of a golf course like this. And I'd probably say, I think I like him a little bit better than Cam Smith. His short game is elite. I think as far as a pivot is concerned, probably Dustin Johnson is my guy here. I mean, if you want to look at last week, he was in the top 10, but it wasn't anything great. But I'm not really worried about how anybody did last week. I don't think, winning a golf tournament was on the forefront of DJ's mind. I don't think he's underpriced, but I think he's a guy that could be there on Sunday afternoon and nobody would be surprised.
The Spieth stuff's really interesting because for the most of the year, he's really struggled with the putter. And now he's gained in 3 of his last 4, including 5 strokes that he gained at Muirfield Village the last time we saw him. He has been much more accurate off the tee. If you start looking through kind of some of the historic ownership numbers here and see, just to kind of point out, because I was just on Xander Schauffele's page, and Xander just never gets below like 16%. Just never, ever does. It's 16 up to 30. And Spieth is much more all over the place. And you can actually see where people don't want to play him. So 5% owned at Torrey Pines, 6.7 at the Genesis, 4.4 at the RBC Heritage, 13.4 at Muirfield Village. Those are basically like the smallest of amounts of ownership that you kind of gotten for Spieth in the last year or so. Those are courses that are penal for wayward drives. However, he's been great. I mean, the win at RBC Heritage, he won at 4.4% ownership. So I don't think perception is necessarily matching reality from backers and people who might invest in Jordan Spieth.
Oh, I totally agree. And in fact, you show that 13.4 ownership percentage at the Memorial. I suspect that's what his ownership is going to be. I mean, not to the decimal, but like, it wouldn't shock me at all if it's right at 13.4, 13.5%. I think people are going to appreciate his around the green game, but they're going to want to play Xander, or they're going to want to go down to Will Zalatoris, Hideki, maybe Patrick Cantlay. So I think Jordan, I don't think he gets squeezed out. So he's like 10%, but I think he's around 13%, which I think there's still good value in that number.
I was also not arguing, but we were having a discussion with Kyle about this last night.
It was an argument. Let's make it more salacious. It was an argument.
I don't think US Open setups are in general all that great for Jordan Spieth, but this is not your super long standard US Open setup. And I think there's going to be a lot of creativity involved that looks, especially around the greens, more like an Open Championship. So I don't know. I think Spieth is most certainly the X factor this week. If he won it, I would not be surprised. If he missed the cut, I don't think I would be surprised. I believe he's the X factor.
Last 24 rounds, he's number 1 around the green. He's 10th off the tee. He's 15th on approach. The putter has been giving him fits, but at fairways, he's about middle of the pack. Sand saves, by the way, in the top 10. So, I mean, he's checking almost every single box. And again, this is probably because of the lack of length, at least relative to some US Open setups. This is probably more a strategic course than people are giving it credit for. And if you want a strategic course, I think Jordan Spieth is probably your guy. Again, you can make the same argument about Cameron Smith, but actually between those two, I like Jordan Spieth a little bit better. But listen, if you wanted to just be a little contrarian and start a couple sprayers with, your first 2 guys, if you wanted to start with Cam Smith and Jordan Spieth, you're going to be really different.
Just to close the loop on Dustin Johnson, here's his profile leading into this event. 8th at the Live Golf London. Is that good or bad? You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to kind of decide if that's a good result for DJ when he was clearly the best player in a 48-player field, or if I'm disappointed with that 8th place finish.
Oh, it's objectively bad. I mean, when you look at, let's see, Oliver Becker beat him. Adrian, I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Sam Horsfield beat him. Uline, I love Uline. I'm really sad that he went over to Live, to be honest with you. But Brandon Grace beat him. Obviously, Charles Schwartzel. It's bad, but then it's Dustin Johnson. Like I don't know how much he cared about that tournament, to be honest with you. And he's not the type of guy that a fire is going to be lit under him because of what he's seeing in the press and on the internet and things of that nature. But to the extent that is a thing for DJ, how sweet would it be for him, as understated as he is, to just waltz right back to the PGA Tour, to the US Open, get an outright, and then go right back to Live without even saying anything? You know how he's going to handle that, right? So it was a great win. He's not going to do the Rory thing, which I loved, by the way. He's just going to be understated and walk right back over and play the Live tournament.
You know what would be amazing is if the final 3 groups are some combination of Rory, JT, Spieth, Bryson, Dustin Johnson, Patrick Reed, and we just get a full-on like PGA versus Live final 3 groups battle this thing out to the death. How sick would that be?
It's like a team event all of a sudden if that happens. I mean, here's the reality. There's so much going on with this tournament that I think there's excitement, or maybe just as much excitement, sort of off the course as there is on. I know that sounds weird, but for me, it's not. I think this is a huge sociological experiment in terms of how these players are going to handle things. I think it would be really cool to at least have one of these Live guys like battling down the stretch. I'm talking like Sunday afternoon. They're somewhere in the top 3 and they're within a couple strokes. I think the drama that would create just across the whole like golf world, I think would be really, really super interesting.
Be good for clicks, I'll tell you that. Our post-round recaps would be hitting all-time highs if that happens. The bottom of this 9K range, Sia, is kind of fascinating because you get, major championship guy, Will Zalatoris, Patrick Cantlay, who's kind of the opposite of that, Hideki Matsuyama, and Shane Lowry. Lowry's been phenomenal. I'm on the record as I love his creativity. His short game is the best. All good with Shane Lowry, but how do you see the bottom of this range?
Yeah, I'm always going to like Shane Lowry. It does give me a little bit of pause that he hasn't been good at US Opens. I just thought that was kind of a weird thing for him. Again, this is a slightly different setup, but something I think that is at least noteworthy. But at 9,000, he's a great value, period. Shane Lowry's been striking it really well. His around the green game is pretty great. It's not great. It's good. Sand saves are great. Here's the thing about Hideki. I kind of want to play Hideki because I don't think he's going to be super high owned, but I noticed the betting market isn't super respectful of him right now. He is in some markets, he's right around, in some he's 35 to 1, and some he's around 40 to 1. And I know at a prominent one, he is 40 to 1, and that's matched with Louis Oosthuizen and Sung Jae Im. Now, I like both of those guys too, but I just think that's a little weird that he's not really getting respect in the betting market.
He also he's never really that highly owned for DFS purposes. I mean, somewhere between 10 and 15%. Sometimes he'll drop down to single digits. I forgot the last time we saw him was the DQ because of the whiteout.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. Not to get too revenge narrative on you, too revenge narrative-y on you, but that is a sort of knowing Hideki, knowing the type of person he is, that is a stain on his a bigger stain on his record than it would be for the average person, in my opinion. Do you think there's something to him coming back and just being really pissed and wanting to excel even more than he normally would?
I don't know. I hope so. I've never seen anything like that. I have no idea what happened there. I don't know, man. I don't think he needs it. He's this is, and I've said this plenty of times, but I think a lot of people lump in the fact that they say Hideki's a bad short game guy, which is not true. He has historically been a poor putter. He has always been great around the greens, and he's actually been a much better putter in 2022. So I will continue to kind of go to bat here for Hideki and be he's not being given the proper, kudos that he should be based on these advanced metrics that we're seeing.
And let me just say something before I forget to say it. So you mentioned how, with Rory, for example, a lot of this pricing came out before the tournament, the last tournament ended. It's pretty wild to consider that a guy like Sung Jae and Louis at 7,600 are the same betting odds on a lot of sites as a guy like Hideki Matsuyama. I don't know if people want to factor that in. I mean, generally I do. I don't know if they want to factor it in as it pertains to Hideki, but there's a lot of what I think people will perceive as misprices, especially when we get to this 8K and 7K range, which will create chalk, which will create natural pivots. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. Let me ask you before we leave this 9K range, are you playing Patrick Cantlay? Because he's going to be low owned.
So I'm the cartoon character that just routinely steps on the rake, right? And it smacks me in the face, and I never learn. So the answer to that is, like, right now, before, like, it's Monday afternoon. I don't have a projected ownership number right now. I'm like, no, I'm not going to play Patrick Cantlay. But I know when that turns to 6% or something like that, I will be in. I just genuinely refuse to believe. I don't even know what is the narrative that majors are too big for him. Well, he's won the FedEx Cup and he's won playoff events and he's won everything else. Like, I refuse to believe that a major has him shaking in his boots.
I also refuse to believe that.
And his game is so strong, it should be set up perfectly for major championships. So if I'm the idiot who steps on the rake over and over again, that's fine. But I know that as Thursday morning comes around, Patrick Cantlay will be involved in my pool.
He will 100% be below 10% because people are going to want to play Lowry. They'll play a little bit of Decky. They'll play a lot of Will Zalatoris, Jordan Spieth, Xander Schauffele. There's just not room for Patrick Cantlay, especially with his track record at majors to be played. So I think Cantlay and DJ are some pretty great pivots if you have the stones to play him.
All right, well, here I go again, I suppose, with Patrick Cantlay. All right, gents, let's move on. $8,000 range, $7,000 range, 6Ks, find some value in this field. But first, we are going to take a quick break and hear a word from our partners. And we're back. $8,000 range, Sia, still relatively small. The top of it, Joaquin Neiman, Cam Young, Brooks Koepka, Billy Horschel. The bottom half, Matt Fitzpatrick, Daniel Berger, Sam Burns, Tony Finau, and then we round it out with Max Homa and Terrell Hatton. Oof, there's a lot here. How would we like to start the 8K range?
Tony Finau is another guy that if the pricing came out after the tournament was finished, he'd probably be 700-800 higher. He's going to be super chalky. Let me just point that out real quick. Go ahead.
Look at, like, in the same way that Rahm plugged the leak, in the same way that Hideki has plugged a leak, Tony Finau has plugged a leak. He is no longer hemorrhaging strokes in the short game categories. He's actually gaining a ton, and he's still with the elite ball stroke. I mean, I'm not a Tony Finau guy, and this is a stat profile. I've bet him this week.
It's hard to ignore that. And what's funny is I immediately look at putting and I'm like, yeah, but he gained 6.37 putting. But then I'm like, oh, well, look what he did off the tee and on approach. Like, he was just a beast across all metrics. It's pretty crazy.
He gained 18 strokes at the RBC Canadian, which is good enough to win like most events on the PGA Tour. It's just that Rory gained 20. So sorry.
Like 99% of tournaments, I'm guessing, or something close to that.
Probably.
So in this 8K range, so I like Cameron Young. I'd be curious to see where his ownership ends up. I think it's going to be sort of in that middling, like 13-14% range. I'm probably okay with that. Cameron Young is just a guy that's, like a lot of these young guys, defying all odds. And when you look at the metrics, they're also really great off the tee, on approach, around the green. He's been really good, like a veteran. I like Billy Horschel as a contrarian play. There's so many good options in this 8K range that I'm quite certain Billy Horschel gets squeezed out here. And honestly, I kind of think of him as a big game hunter. He's in good form. The approach play isn't great. It never really has been. Even in tournaments where he's been successful, like approach has been a big thing, and he's found a way to navigate around that or just pop on approach. The around the green game is great with him, though. So I think he's a good sort of game theory play. I think Fitzpatrick and Berger are going to be really popular. I like them both. I probably like Fitzpatrick more for cash. I like Berger more for tournaments because he'll have much less ownership than Fitzpatrick. If you recall, Rick, at the Memorial, I was really big on Daniel Berger, and that worked out to a T5. So I think his game is in good form. I don't think the putter's going to give him too much of a problem on this course. I think he'll probably be an even putter, and that's going to be just fine for him. He'll keep it in the fairway. The approach game is strong. The around the green game is strong. So those are probably my favorite plays. I mentioned Finau. I probably won't play him, but in cash, I'll probably play him.
Yeah, I mean, so I enter this week with 3 future tickets that I've made in the last month or so. 2 of them are in this range. One is Daniel Berger. One is Tony Finau. I've disclosed those. The other's coming up. It's Patrick Reed. This 8K range is fascinating. Cam Young, whose game you'd think would set up great for a U.S. Open, has missed the 2 cuts at the U.S. Opens he's played at, which, again, I'm willing to forget all about that, considering what I've seen from him this year and the fact that you don't usually get a bomber who has touch around the greens, which is exactly what Cam Young has. The biggest question that I have, and the guy that I can't figure out is Brooksy. Hey, Brooksy. He's got the obviously back-to-back wins here in, what was that, 17 and 18, I think, right? 17, 18 or 16, 17? 17, 18.
I think it was 17, 18, which feels like literally a decade ago.
Yeah, then he went runner-up, then he went 4th, which is just like insane. But man, it's not been great, right? Like I've got his profile up here, and it's a bunch of okay results. If you're Brooks Koepka, you don't want okay results. And I think maybe even more concerning, Sia, there's no trend to this, right? Mm-hmm. Some weeks he's bad with the putter. Some weeks he's bad around the green. Some weeks he loses a ton with the driver, or he can't find his approach play. This is a generally, if this wasn't Brooks Koepka at the U.S. Open, this would be a very concerning stat profile.
Looking at this again on YouTube, we almost have to go, we have to go back to June 2021 to see any semblance of like really good ball striking on a consistent level. That was a long time ago. I mean, that was a year ago. And I know he was dealing with the injury after that, and he's probably still dealing with the knee to some degree. But yeah, I don't see it. I mean, if you're trying to find leverage in this tournament, I don't think you have to go to Brooks Koepka. I'd rather go leverage in so many other, like Billy Horschel, like Dustin Johnson, perhaps, like some of these guys that are going to be low owned in the 7K range. So I just don't, unless you're entering like 150 lineups and you just want to throw a couple bones at Brooks, that's fine. But if you're in a 3-max or a cash game or a single entry, I just don't see the justification for playing Brooks Koepka at this point.
This is, I agree with you, but I will note that this is the cheapest major championship price on Brooks Koepka in my database, which is like 4 years worth of salaries. So if at least you'd be buying at the cheapest, but I agree with the sentiment. I don't think I'll get there.
Yeah. I mean, we said that the same thing maybe 3 weeks ago about Matthew Wolff. Like, some of these guys are just sinking ships and there's nothing to patch the hole. They just are sinking ships and there's no reason to be early on them.
I love this range quite a bit. Sam Burns, who's been phenomenal. We already talked about Berger and Fitzpatrick and Finau. Cam Young. I mean, Joaquin. I love everybody in this range. Koepka and Billy Horschel are probably just the odd man out for me. And Terrell Hatton, who has missed his last 2 cuts at the U.S. Open and hasn't played particularly great, and probably is going to hate everything about the country club. Like, I'll cross those 3 names out, but everybody else in this range, I think I enjoy quite a bit.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention Max Homa, who is, again, when it comes to around the green game, he's probably not going to show up super positive in modeling, but as of late, the around the green game's actually been pretty good. And we know the ball striking has been good, and we know he can get hot with the putter. At 8,100, he's another guy like him, and Tony Finau are 2 guys that I think present like really tremendous value.
Yeah, and friend of the pod, Max Homa, we had him on, and I love when this happens. He was, I think we must have had him on here-ish, where he was kind of just giving a bunch of, it was probably right for the Masters, and he was just giving a bunch of strokes away around the green, and he was saying, like, yeah, we're working really hard on that. We know it's a weak part of our game, and he's kind of fixed it, which is always kind of cool to see when, like, the narrative and the stats line up. I think that's fun. Joseph in the chat, thank you for the reminder. I whiffed on this. So the all-important fan voting link for the one and done, that link is in the description. You can go right now and cast your vote for the fans for who your one and done selection is going to be this week. The fans, you and I, can commiserate with Terrell Hatton because he got us both a 0 last week. So hopefully we can both find someone better. But that link is in the description. We are going live. It'll be Tuesday morning at like 1 p.m. Eastern time. That's when the voting will close. So make sure you get those votes in now. get all your stuff situated, and we will rock and roll. I almost forgot about that, Sia.
I've been trying to forget about it for the last like 2.5 months. To tell the truth.
Unsuccessfully, we've been trying to forget it. All right. 7K range. Just like 40 golfers here. And actually, I'll have to check because I was waiting earlier for DraftKings to add the last like 10 or so guys into this field. So there might end up being more than 40. But as of right now, 40 guys in this 7K range, and they are of all different statures. It starts with Bryson DeChambeau and Corey Connors. It goes all the way down to, let's see, Brian Harmon, Kevin Na, Luke List. So a lot to go through here. Let's start with a couple of names.
Yeah, so I'll give you a few names that are chalky, a few names that I think are good, like game theory pivots, and one that's sort of in the middle. I think Corey Connors is the one that's going to be sort of in the middle. I think people are going to be impressed with what he did. By the way, it was kind of tilting. I think he made the cut on the number. I completely faded him last week, and he just went completely nuclear on Sunday. Same goes for Cam Smith. He was a full fade for me as well, and I guess he didn't do much Saturday and Sunday now that I think about it. But I think Connors Sunday is going to remind people that Connors is a pretty good player and that he's probably going to keep it in the fairway more than most. And he's probably going to hit more greens in regulation than most. So I think he's interesting at 7,900.
Can
Go ahead.
Hat tip Corey Connors, so what was his win? 2019, I think, where he Monday qualified and then won. I think that was 2019 Valero. And he was like the captain of Team No Putt, right? Where he was losing over a half a stroke per round in 2019. Over a half a stroke per round in 2020. 2021, he was like a dead even tour average putter. And this season, he's gaining nearly a quarter of a stroke. That is, and he's not really losing anywhere else. This is a beautiful combination. I wish he won more because he doesn't get the respect of just that one victory. But this is a stat profile of a guy who is about to pile up wins. I don't know if it's at a US Open, but like that's the stat profile of a guy who's going to pile them up.
Right. And I think probably for the next 2 to 3 months, his price tag is going to be a little lower than it should be. So I think, and here, I think it, I think his price tag is fine here. I don't think he should be more than 7,900 considering who's in the 8K range, but you can make the argument he should be. So I think Connors is a pretty great play. A couple really popular guys. One that is definitely mispriced is Sung J M. I mean, obviously, Sung J M should not be 7,600. I mean, he's going to rate out really well in almost everybody's models for good reason. The ball striking is great. Short game is good. The form, he's coming in with good form with, let's see, T10, T15, 14th, T20, T21, 8th. That's just the last 6 tournaments. I think he's going to be the most popular guy on the slate is my guess. Another guy that's going to be pretty popular is Mito Pereira at 7,800. He has pretty much everything you want in terms of this tournament. A couple pivots that I think I like. One is Louis. I did mention him. He did play last week. He was a T10, which really truly doesn't mean anything to me.
We definitely don't know what it means.
Right. That's exactly, which means I'm just not going to factor it in. He got through 4 rounds, or I should say 3 rounds. Yeah. So that tells me something. Okay. You're healthy enough to get through 54 holes. I think he's going to be a really good pivot, though, because I don't think a lot of people will be on him for 2 reasons. One is there's a lot of other guys to jump onto. 2, people haven't really seen him. And I'll add a third one. There is a live tour bias here. People aren't generally going to want to play most of these guys. So I think Louis is interesting, and I like Webb Simpson. We've talked about him a good amount lately. I don't think there's going to be any ownership on him, and I think he's been hitting the ball quite well lately. I think he's being overlooked. I don't think he can win the tournament, but at 7,400, can he top 15? I think so.
There are going to be some really low-owned top 7s coming out, or top 8s coming out of the 7K range. Just some of these guys like a Webb Simpson who's starting to look a little bit more like himself. I'm not saying he's like completely back to, and he might never be like Webb's. I don't know how old Webb is, but he might never be that guy we saw in 2019 and 2018, but he's starting to look a lot better. I will say, so I'm going to skip down a little bit further to Kevin Na here, Sia, because you mentioned the live golf bias. And I hate to say that I think this sets up pretty well for Kevin Na, who, look at his last 5 measured events in the approach category, +9, +4, +6, +3, +7. He still has the great short game. he has to lose like just one stroke off the tee instead of 4. If he loses 4, it doesn't matter. But if he loses 1, I think there's a pretty decent path for a guy who has seemingly plenty of upside.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And he's not going to have any ownership, in my opinion, for a lot of the reasons I just set out a couple minutes ago. So I think Kevin Na is great. I think there's a lot of guys down there that are good. Davis Riley, a more popular option. What do you think of Justin Rose? I mean, it's a little, chasing.
Yeah,
Sunday, but...
I always feel like that final round or like final weekend charge from some golfer, it just lives in everybody's head. And he gains a ton of strokes with the putter, as you have to do to kind of shoot a 60 on Sunday with 3 bogeys on the card and 3 eagles on the card. And I don't know, man. I will give him credit that he's been better like since the PGA Championship than he was before. I just think he's being held up with sticks and like pebbles. You know what I mean? Like I could see this all coming crashing down fairly shortly.
Yeah, no, I get it. And if he's getting any ownership as a result of what people saw, then it's an easy pivot. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. I guess my question would be, well, what if he didn't shoot a 60? What if he shot like a 67? Yeah. So he had like a pretty good tournament, but it wasn't excellent. At 7,100, would you consider him?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I mean, like, let's just say he gained 4 strokes putting. So now his last, 5 events were +4, +4, +2, +2, -1.5. That would feel less fluky. So maybe that's a good point. Maybe I've allowed the pendulum to swing too far in my perception, because if he just gained 4 strokes putting, I would be like, oh, that's pretty good. So yeah, I think you're right. I think I've overreacted to Justin Rose.
Fair enough.
Tommy Fleetwood, I think he's back. I think he's playing back like Tommy again, where he's got the savvy little short game and he's kind of gaining strokes across the board. You nailed Sung J M, who I'm quite excited about as well. So is everybody else. Davis Riley. So I do wonder, and I cannot wait for the ownership on Davis Riley, because if you start looking I bet you the last 24 rounds. Yeah, last 24 rounds, it's Rory, Sam Burns, Justin Thomas, Davis Riley. That's how good he's been over the last 24. But you always start to question these younger guys who lack major championship experience. I think I trust Davis Riley more than most, but I'm interested to see what the ownership or what the industry does with him.
Yeah, I think he's going to be right where you think he is. In other words, I think he's going to end up being like 13, 12, 14%, something in between 12 and 14%. So not super popular, but popular enough where, it'll raise an eyebrow. I got to say, though, I don't even know what to do with these young guys anymore, because Rick, you could have said the same thing about Davis Riley 3 tournaments ago. In other words, like, yeah, like at a certain point, these young guys are just not going to, they're not going to stay this consistent. I mean, it's same thing with Mito, same thing with Cameron Young. Like, when does the bottom fall out? And the answer might be, it doesn't. I genuinely don't know. I know it's 7,300. I'll tell you this about Davis Riley. In the betting market, he's 80-1. So is Tyrrell Hatton. So is Keegan Bradley. So is Seamus Power. So are Taylor Gooch. 3 of those guys are 7,500, and Tyrrell Hatton's 8,000. So he's getting respect in the betting market, not a tremendous amount of respect, but enough so that he probably is underpriced. He's definitely worth considering if the ownership isn't too high. This
is Taylor Gooch's stat profile that I'm showing right now, which is another guy that I have no idea what to do with. Finished 9th in London, which I think that must have taken a Saturday charge, because he was not in the mix for the vast majority of that event. T27 at the Charles Schwab. I also wonder, so when he played the Charles Schwab, Sia, he knew he was going to live golf, right? And it just hadn't come out yet. I want to go back and start looking at some of the results, the final results for those guys on the PGA Tour, because I feel like a lot of them didn't play well, probably because they knew this announcement was coming. And now I wonder if it's like, okay, I don't know. I can see it both ways. Hey, I'm coming back into enemy territory, or I got away with it. I made my money. I'm allowed to play the US Open. I'm going to freewheel it now. There's no more surprises. Like, I don't know. It's so strange.
Well, I think at least as it pertains to the U.S. Open, there's strength in numbers. If it was just Taylor Gooch coming back, or just DJ, or just Patrick Reed, name the player, Phil Mickelson, then I think it would be a little like nerve-wracking. I think it would be a little stressful. But there's a bunch of guys. It's not just like 2 or 3 guys. I mean, I didn't do the math, but especially if you go in that 6 and 7K range, I'm assuming, maybe somebody knows the answer to this, it's probably like 15 to 16, maybe as close to 20 guys that are coming back. So I don't think it's going to bother most of these players. And to your point about Kevin Na, again, strokes gain narrative a little bit here, but I think he's a guy that would really be motivated by the disdain that he is likely to receive today forward.
Yeah, I mean, just in the 7K range alone, Bryson DeChambeau, Louis Oosthuizen, Taylor Gooch, Sergio Garcia, Patrick Reed, who is someone who also might thrive in the villainous role, who also I've been showing this throughout the week, but I'll just pull up his profile here. Like, Patrick Reed on small greens has been awesome in his career because his short game is so good, right? Like it's the bizarro Bryson. When Bryson won at Winged Foot, it's because everyone was playing out of the rough and Bryson's the best out of the rough and he was closer to the hole. If everyone is playing from greenside, the best short game guys are going to win. Patrick Reed is still one of those best short game guys. Yeah,
and while he's been pretty bad off the tee, like he does keep it in the fairway better than at least half the people in this tournament.
And it hasn't been okay. This is a very low bar, but look at this stretch from the 3M Open last year to the Players Championship. He was hemorrhaging strokes off the tee. He hasn't been great, but it's been way better. He's a positive in his last, 8 events.
Yeah, that's night and day. And that's why, again, if you're doing a model and it's not distinguishing, like, let's put it this way. If you're doing a model and you want to do like 50 or 60 or whatever, however many rounds, you might want to click on like 24 too, just to get a different perspective, because that's night and day.
Yeah, really is. Okay. Anybody else in the 7K range before I get us into the 6s?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about 2 guys because, I think one of these guys is going to be really popular. Brian Harman at 7,000. I want to ask you about him, who's another guy who's great with the short game, who will likely keep it in the fairway and maybe benefits from a slight lack of distance relative to other U.S. Open setups. And Siwoo Kim at 7,000 as well. I think you can go down to that Patrick Reed 7,200 range, 7,000 range with these 2 guys and really round out your lineup. I think a lot of people will do that. I wanted to get your opinion on those 2 guys.
Yeah, so I don't think people give Siwoo Kim enough credit for kind of the upside and the around the green play that he does have. He's very savvy in the short game as well as being a pretty darn good ball striker. He's just a very volatile guy, right? He's going to be all over the place. So if you want that, that's great. Harman is much more of a consistent high floor guy where you can see he gains strokes across the board, which is fairly rare in the $7,000 range. He has somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that runner-up finish at the U.S. Open was Aaron Hills, which is played 8,000 yards, right? And that's not a spot that Harman should really contend at, and he did. I do think this is, in a larger scope of USGA setups, probably going to be one of the better U.S. Open setups.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, the U.S. Open setups that over the last 4 years that he's played, which maybe haven't been as good as this one for him, 19th, 38th, 36th, and 2nd. You brought up the runner-up one. So, yeah. I mean, he's in pretty good form. The last 4 tournaments, 9th, 34th, missed cut 18th. And he's been good at U.S. Opens, and he's only 7,000. Now, he's probably going to carry some ownership. It wouldn't shock me if he's 10, 11%, in which case maybe, that's not terrible, but maybe I'd just go with like a Siwoo or something. But I think Harman's really interesting from a value standpoint.
The $6,000 range. There are a handful of, kind of PGA Tour pros that we see on a weekly basis, and then all of the qualifiers, Sia. So remember, this is open qualifying, and I believe 66 golfers in this field qualified in over almost half the field came through open qualifying. So you're seeing a lot of names that you don't recognize. You're going to see a lot of names that we don't have any statistics on. So let's start parsing through maybe some of the names that we know, and then we can kind of work our way out from there.
Yeah, this is a really tough range. And here's the thing. I think the perception is that 6x6 is going to be really difficult here, and it might be. But if you X out a lot of these guys that you kind of know have no chance, that maybe 5% are going to emerge. I'm not talking about the whole 6K range, but when you get to 6,600 and below, like, I don't know what the percentage of those guys that are going to make the cut, but it's certainly low. So something to consider. I don't know that I'd go below 7,000 unless I'm really just trying to like be different. A couple of names that jump out to me a little bit. Kisner, maybe. Let's see. Scott Stallings, Victor Perez. My guy Danny Lee is down there. Other than that, maybe Joel Dahman. Other than that, I'm just not really interested in any of these guys.
It's very difficult. I'm not a Francesco Molinari guy, but you look at his recent finishes. He's got a 26th at the Memorial, which actually he faded. He was playing better than that. 17th at the Byron Nelson. He made the cut at the PGA. And then his last 3 U.S. Opens, he has 3 top 25s. When things get hard, I think it's better for Molinari. And also, again, kind of like Brian Harman, this is, I'm not saying it's a great setup for him, but this is a better U.S. Open setup than most. A couple of these kind of harder guys to figure out. This Adri Arnas, he's from Spain. He plays on the European Tour. I can probably pull up his results, actually. Let me just make sure here. Yeah, okay. So, again, a lot of DP World Tour stuff. Made the cut at the PGA Championship. He finished T16 at the Porsche European Open. You can see he's got he had a stretch with 4 straight top 10s. Again, I don't know how much you want to weigh this, Sia, right? Like, oh, he finished T8 at the Magical Kenya Open. Like, okay. Like, that's cool. That earned him some bucks, but is this better than some of the other guys in the 6K range? I'd imagine it is. A lot of these guys don't have status anywhere.
Yeah, it's definitely better than most. I mean, I think this is a pretty good find, especially when you look at those Euro tournament finishes and then you look at what he did at the PGA Championship. It wasn't fluky that, in fact, looking at those numbers, if he was just like a decent putter, I mean, that's a top 20 finish right there. So I don't know, that's a good one. I think I might have to include him in a couple lineups.
I also like that, there's a lot of guys that are playing in their first major championship and he's not, right? So he finished 30th at the PGA Championship. As we mentioned, he played in the Olympics, right? So like, this is not a stage that's too big for him. The other one, and if you remember the days where Outlaw Tour was the only thing going on.
Yes.
Yannick and Jeremy Paul. Remember the twins?
No way. They're in this tournament?
Yannick is in the field. He qualified. And he's been playing. So I have his European Tour results. So that Porsche European Open, which was last week, he finished T18. A couple weeks ago, he had a runner-up finish. He's also played on the Challenge Tour as well at the end of last year. He was kind of destroying that with a bunch of top 10 finishes. So he's just been playing good golf for 2 years, and he's been leveling up, Sia, right? It's Outlaw Tour to Challenge Tour to DP World Tour. Like that is showing me progression. So I don't mind that either. He's a very talented player.
I lost way too much money on the Outlaw Tour during the beginnings of COVID, and I loved every minute of it. The fact that we were able to play DFS golf during like the heart of COVID was an absolute blessing. Bo Hostler, any love for him? I see your boy down here.
Yeah, so he hasn't played in the U.S. Open in a long time, but I think he open qualified in. I don't think he got in on anything that he would have had to have open qualified. But look, I mean, his last 4 have been pretty good, right? He's got 2 top 25s, Charles Schwab and Byron Nelson. He made the cut at the PGA, and then I think kind of fell apart on the weekend. And then he finished top 35 at the Memorial. The Memorial was like the 5th best field we've had this year, Sia. So like, if you're looking for guys who played well at the Memorial, like that was a big boy event. And the course is a major championship course, and the field was super, super strong. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of diamonds in the rough down here.
Fair enough. All right.
There are some coal in the rough or whatever. I don't know.
Yes, some coal indeed.
Okay. This is the U.S. Open. You are Sia Nejad. Do we have any potential narratives that we would like to roll through here?
We do. We got a few actually. They were all early entries. I didn't even actually have to tweet anything out, and normally I would, but because pricing came out early, we just got some volunteers here. So John Markowski, Spencer Aguiar at Tee Off Sports, who I do a show with Tuesday nights, by the way. He's a great analyst, and Chris Bach. So where do you want to start, Rick?
Okay. I think I understand all of these. So, which is good. Let's start with the GOAT, John Markowski. So he has seemingly opted into a Boston-based narrative, and he begins his lineup with Clam Chowder Smith. Clam Chowder, that's pretty good. Pat, you can't play better than Bird in the 86 finals. You have to say it like Patrick Cantlay. Tony Finoma over Jeter all day. Nomar Garcia Parra, Tony Fino.
Yeah.
Abe, wicked smart answer on that test. Pick me up a six-pack at Pick me up a 6 at the pack. Keegan Bradley. I do not get that one.
Yeah, I actually don't either. I'm assuming pick me up a 6 is a thing in Boston or Massachusetts.
Pack Keegan. I don't get that one. Tom, it's a grinder, not a hoagie. That's pretty good. That line is 1,000 exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty great.
Wow, that's pretty good. Someone will have to explain the Keegan one to me. Okay, Brian says Packy is a place we get beer.
Okay, gotcha.
Pack Keegan Bradley.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Nice. All right. You learn
That-
something new every day.
That's definitely a Boston thing. Okay, so Spencer goes Team Boston Tea Party, which these are all seemingly traitors, defectors. Dustin
That's
Johnson,
right.
Rusty DeChambeau, Louis Eustace, and Kevin Knopf, Phil Mickelson, Taylor Gooch leaves you $3,700.
That's a solid one.
I like that.
We got some historical context there. The Boston Tea Party, when did that occur? I looked that up. December 16th, 1773, right before the American Revolution, or a few years before the American Revolution.
1773.
Yes. I think that the Boston Tea Party spawned the phrase no taxation without representation as well, which also led to the American Revolution ultimately.
I believe that. And then Chris goes with strokes gained annoyance, which I assume he just has the most annoying players here. Bryson DeChambeau, Billy Horschel, Phil Mickelson, Grayson Murray, Kevin Na, Patrick Reed. Did you see that Kevin Na and Grayson Murray's lockers are right next to each other this week?
No. Oh, that's fantastic.
Prime. Like by the USGA. Thank you very much.
You know, part of the reason I put Chris's in there, and Chris is a big supporter. He's always submitting lineups, strokes gain narrative lineups. And by the way, everybody, good job doing the strokes gain narrative hashtag. Spencer, you got to do that next time. But other annoying players, though, real quick, like Sergio Garcia came to mind. Is he annoying? I mean, he's kind of annoying, right? No, not really.
I think there's kind of a difference between annoyance and just kind of being a jerk.
Yeah, fair enough.
Like Bryson might be both. Although every interaction I've had with Bryson, he's been great, but I could see how he could be both of those things. I think Jordan Spieth is kind of annoying, but I don't think he's a jerk. Like I think he's one of the nicest guys around. I just think his personality can be found quite annoying.
Well, so there's a difference there, right? Because if you're his caddy, you would find it annoying. I think just being on the outside looking in, it's not as annoying as like somebody like Bryson, where like everything he does, you're just kind of like, really, man? Like, really?
Right. Exactly. So I think it's kind of like a little bit different of how you look at it. But these are definitely 6 guys that I think the general public finds annoying.
Yeah, agree. I think it's a good lineup.
Yeah. Okay. So anything else before we get out of here on this US Open week?
No, I think I'm on tomorrow with you, Rick. We're going to do, I think I might be joining the mega preview. So I'm excited about that. We'll have some bets and, some fun stuff like that, but I'm looking forward to this. I think I should say we should monitor the weather. I know you do your show Wednesdays, and I know that's usually a topic that comes up, but there may be a weather advantage. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, I've been monitoring the weather and it's been ever changing. So I'm going to continue to wait and just see as we get closer, but certainly something to keep an eye on. Big thanks to producer Troy, does all the hard work behind the scenes. That right there is Sia Nejad. You can find him on Twitter at Sia Nejad. You can also find the link to fill out the fan vote for the one and done, which needs to be done basically right now. Go do it right now in the description. That is available to you. And you can also tweet at me at RickRunGood. This has been The First Cut. We'll catch you next time.